All right, thank you everyone for taking the necessary steps to be here today safely. We hope that the symposium remains a positive and safe experience, and we look forward to the great activities planned for this week. From Space to Mud and Beyond welcomes 4 esteemed panelists from various backgrounds, representing GEOINT supply chain from sensor through data onward to decision. GEOINT is emerging in many new ways, and so this broad panel focuses on a broad audience as well. We will begin our session with each panelist briefly introducing themselves, and then we will use pre-selected topics to foster conversation for about 15 minutes or so. After that, we'll entertain any questions from the audience. When we open the floor to the audience, it should be about 10 minutes past the hour, no later than 15. So at any time, you can start generating them, and then we'll start taking them then. So at this time, I'd like to ask each of our panelists to briefly introduce yourselves. Please let us know who you are, your role in the organization you represent, and how your background contributes to the panel today. So we'll go ahead and start with you, Joe.
Awesome, good morning. My name is Joe Morrison. I'm the Vice President of Commercial Product at Umbra, which is a space technology company. We're building a synthetic aperture radar satellite constellation right now. So in my role as VP of Commercial Product, I'm focused on our commercial customer experience, what it's like to buy satellite data from us. And our mission is to make it as easy to buy high-resolution on-demand satellite imagery as it is to book a hotel room online. So that's my role.
Great.
Kevin.
Good morning. My name is Colonel Kevin Gollinghorst. Glad to be here with this distinguished panel today. And I'm currently the commander of the St. Louis district with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers right here in the great city, St. Louis. But former job was down at Fort Leonard Wood, also in Missouri, as the program manager for geospatial capabilities across the entire Army. So I won't plan to speak across all the Corps of Engineers and Army today, but really in these positions really help to highlight how the federal government and how the Corps of Engineers is leveraging geospatial data for those on the ground, in the mud, so to speak. So thanks.
Thank you. All right, Gabe.
Good morning. My name is Gabe Chang. I'm the Federal CTO's Office Architect with IBM. I'm a client technical leader with the intelligence community for roughly 20 to 30 years. Also, as a secondary role, doing a lot with quantum computing, and we're looking forward to this conference.
Thank you. And Ann.
Good morning. My name is Ann Carbonell, and I am a principal and senior advisor for Riverside Research. I'm currently focused on a project called the Commercial Innovation Center, where we are focused on availing a lot of the commercial sources that are available from all the overhead platforms and making them available for developers in a more easy way in a sandbox so that they have data to help with automation and innovation. My experience, I have breadth of experience across the Air Force, working Defense Meteorological Satellite Program, that's where I started. I've worked with the Air Force in the National Air and Space Intelligence Center, or when it had previous names, and most of my career was spent with NGA and multiple director roles from technology to innovation to analysis. And I'm happy to be here today to talk about this topic.
All right, thank you, everybody. And just to get the ball in court, I'm going to put a question on the table. This is open for any of us here. Let's go ahead and start. Can anyone describe a GEOINT challenge that you're working on actively today, and maybe share with us some of the associated challenges with that?
Yeah, I can lead off on that. So before I joined Umbra, I was working for a small software consultant in Philadelphia. We were doing work applying machine learning to satellite imagery, extracting foundational features, roads, buildings, custom machine learning models for folks. And what I saw in that role was how hard it is to acquire high-resolution satellite imagery as a commercial entity. A lot of the times we were piggybacking on government contracts just to get access to any high-resolution satellite imagery. And that didn't jive at all with the message that I was hearing about how exciting machine learning was and all the applications for it. Because if you can't get any imagery to power some application, then it doesn't matter how fancy your algorithm is, it's going to be a moot point. And so what we're working on at Umbra, and the reason that I joined was that while I think for the federal government, there are at times challenges around just processing all the imagery that you already have available to you and figuring out what to do with it. In the commercial world, that's not true. There's some free open data that you can acquire, Sentinel data, Landsat data, federal programs that open data up. But if you want to just go buy satellite imagery, good luck. I mean, seriously, just go try to buy some. It's not a pleasant experience. And so until that becomes really straightforward, until the barrier comes down to being able to acquire it, not only in terms of cost, but also just in terms of having to talk to salespeople, going through 3 months of contract negotiation, worrying about the licensing associated with data, that has to get easier because all of the innovation happening in machine learning and AI and software generally, it's not being applied to satellite imagery at the rate that it should be because of those logistical concerns. So that's what we're focused on as a company, is bringing the barrier to being able to get super high resolution, high quality data on demand in an affordable, accessible way. And frankly, as a business, the impediment to doing that is attracting talent. So that's, I would say, the hardest problem that we're worried about is, I mean, this is an amazing mission. GEOINT is easy to pitch people on the impact of the work, and I think we'll talk about use cases and see how it's a very fulfilling career to have. But you're competing against tech more broadly for software engineering talent. You're competing against prime contractors for engineering talent. So trying to tell the story about how exciting this economy that we're going to open up when we make satellite imagery actually accessible commercially, and how that will flow back through to the federal government in terms of the types of companies that you can now retain to help you on projects because they've been able to get access to imagery and prototype new ideas and start new businesses. I think it's really exciting, but first and foremost, I think as an industry, we have to attract the right talent to be able to build these businesses and build this infrastructure to enable that. So that's what we're focused on.
All right, thank you, Joe. Does anybody else have any input on that?
I'll jump in and just talk about partnerships and how important it is. You know, the federal government, we have a lot of capabilities in-house, and we're proud of that, but we can't do it without, you know, organizations like USGF that bring this community together. So we need to, you know, celebrate the successes and advances we've had to leverage academic and industry exploits and capabilities. But I think that partnership is key, that we can't do it alone, and we're working hard in, you know, on the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and federal government to, you know, reach out and partner with each of you. So, but I think this is going to be a huge challenge moving forward to continue those partnerships.
Definitely, and I just had a quick question while you were following up with Joe too, as I'm trying to connect the two of you together. He was saying that the satellite imagery and connecting that to all the algorithms, you work a lot with lower altitude and ground-based sensors too. Do you find that you're using both of those, or?
Definitely. I think you know, that satellite capability covers that broad area, and the resolution is getting better all the time. But that aerial platforms, I just had a chance to go down to New Orleans, where U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and a lot of other organizations are working, helping with the recovery down there. And we have commercial partners that help provide that aerial imagery before and after, to help provide that analysis of what roofs need to be covered with temporary blue roofs and so forth. So it's really helping speed the process and help limit the amount of people having to get out there in person before the actual work gets done. So it's great to see both space and aerial platforms help us move us quicker and a better resolution.
Nice, thank you. You have anything, Ann?
Yeah, as far as what Joe was talking about, the need to help the developers with the machine learning standpoint, I've been working with, again, bringing in multiple phenomenologies, multiple commercial sensors. Our team is trying to avail that so that we can spur on innovation. A lot of times in the government, each one of the providers are handled separately, what they can do for the government, what they can do for other parts of industry. And we're looking at where can we fuse these data sources or correlate these data sources. Each sensor, each domain, each phenomenology answers different questions. And even the providers are in different orbits, have different revisit rates. So collectively, how can we use all these sources together and promote commercial imagery and commercial sources into different market market areas, not only for the government, but also for academia and industry.
Thanks. And Gabe, you represent more of the beyond side of it here. Gabe's involved with some pretty sophisticated computing and computational efforts. Can you share anything regarding GEOINT that you're looking at today, some of the challenges?
Sure. So primarily in the industry perspective, we've seen a lot of different silos of data. So with the explosion that we're receiving today from information from a number of different repositories, the need for integration is paramount. And what we'd like to do is create something that's similar to a data fabric where you, I'll use an acronym here, MSG, where you manage, secure, and govern your enterprise and your data ecosystem in an intelligent way. And so being able to automate those processes, leave the data where it resides, as well as bringing AI to your data is very important in order to get additional value out of that information. So this sort of data ecosystem is something that we've all seen. You know, let's take the horrible pandemic as one example. There is a lot of legacy information that has to be taken out of these data silos and integrated so that it's both accessible in a secure manner as well as relevant in a timely manner. And so we want to make sure that we have information that is exposed to the users when they need it. And this is part of getting the information to the user in real time.
Thanks. So that's a good cross-section of what GEOINT and its challenges are today. So we have every element space to mud, and mud is really just a metaphor for earth, and beyond would be the concept that space could even be digital space. So we have challenges across the board here. So on that note, I'm going to go ahead and open up another question here. So this is probably back in the space domain. So global navigation satellite systems, or GNSS, are the primary driver of the geospatial industry today. With the increasing constellations and increasing capabilities, what are some of the most cutting-edge uses for remote sensing and satellite imagery across government and industry? And I think Joe and Ann, you might have a fair amount to offer here.
Go ahead.
You want me to lead off again?
Yes, please.
Okay, yeah. Cutting-edge uses for remote sensing data. I would say maybe 5 or 6 years ago, when faced with this question, I would have said the cutting edge would be building platforms for processing all of it. I think we were all on the same page. But in the intervening years, folks like Google Earth Engine, Descartes Labs, Orbital Insight, I mean, everyone that has built a platform is at this event, which is part of what makes it such an exciting place to be. The question is, the platforms are built, so what do you do with them? How do you apply them? And I think the most interesting cutting edge work that's happening starts with a problem and only uses a little bit of remote sensing to solve it, probably similar to the way that you work. So maybe you're focused on a very deep and narrow issue like fraud in a particular insurance market, or trading carbon credits and trying to validate that they're real, that those trees are still standing, that they're based off of. Maybe remote sensing plays a piece of that. Maybe property rights and land data sets play a piece of that. And what I've seen is that I think in the most cutting edge work, the ratio of remote sensing data to non-remote sensing data is maybe 10 or 20 to 1. The amount of other data sets that you have to bring together to be able to make a magical user experience for someone, where all the right data at just the right time is presented at just the right moment to be able to make an informed decision and react to something really quickly, that's not just a satellite ML AI problem. That's a software problem and a systems and a process problem. So the most exciting companies, and including the platform companies, what I've seen happening over the last 2 or 3 years is they're building products where the end user has no idea that remote sensing was involved in the end product for the user. It just feels like this magical insight that pops up right at the right time. How did you know that oil spill was occurring off the coast of California? How did you know the damage from that wildfire so quickly after it occurred? Well, remote sensing was part of that, but there was a lot of other information that had to be integrated. So I think these sort of vertical solutions are where a lot of the innovation is happening, whereas 5, 6 years ago, I think the innovation was happening at the infrastructure level, at the platform level. Not so much anymore. It's what people are building on top of those platforms that's really moving the needle today.
Okay, so given that, what sort of opportunities might be ahead with all these changing applications? And if we can pull it off, is really what I'm getting at. If we can integrate everything and get all the right resources, what do you see happening in the future?
Well, I don't want to talk too much. I'll show you quick. If you're building a business, the opportunity is to pick some niche that no one has gone after yet and dominate it, and then expand from there one at a time. If you're working for a large prime contractor, quit your job and start a company. They can't hit their small business set aside anyway, so they'll subcontract you on their next mission. But we need more entrepreneurs, effectively. That's where the opportunity is on the commercial side. And we need people willing to go deep on a specific problem and nail it, and not try to be all things to all people. On the government side, the opportunity is like, Ann, what you're working on with CIC, it's meeting entrepreneurs halfway and saying, look, we've done the work to curate a data set, to build a training data set that's high quality, to bring together all the resources that we have to bear to make it easy for you to get started and prototype an idea. That's where I think the big opportunity is. And then let AWS and the Planetary Computer at Microsoft and all those groups aggregate that data and those resources in a place where people are already doing their work. And you'll see a bunch of new ideas and new products and new companies get built. I think that those are the biggest opportunities right now.
Okay, thanks. And yeah, you.
Yeah, so, I think that the fusion of all these capabilities are important. We were talking before we came in here, and if innovators can put together applications that can recommend or answer questions, and we can tailor those questions to people's needs. The example we used earlier was when should I water my grass? Can I have a monitor on my phone that detects the water in the soil and determines when's the optimal time, or what patches of grass do I need to water? I mean, it's a very simple application, but there could be a whole series of sensing devices that go into that. With the autonomous cars, we see the same type of thing, where they're all fusing things together to answer the questions that the self-driving car needs to be able to answer in order to drive safely down the road. So being able to fuse those sources in standard ways, it's a very complicated process, but that automation helps us in these visualization and COP type environments.
Nice. Kevin, do you have any input on that too? I see you nodding over there.
I know it was just an analogy, but I do have a family member that makes sure I know when to mow the grass. But I just wanted to comment on the remote sensing capabilities. I think one challenge I've seen throughout my career is we have so many great capabilities, and so this is more to our federal government and our intel community, which is phenomenal, but we oftentimes get into classified areas where much of it is unavailable to folks on the ground in the fight or in a disaster response. And so I think the pandemic, one silver lining, is much of the workforce had to go to the unclassified networks, and we need to keep as much as our data and analysis at the unclassified, and then move up networks as appropriately as possible when necessary. But that's a key aspect. And then the other thing is training. So I know many of you may have fantastic capabilities, but I think an area that we need to really emphasize is the talent you mentioned earlier, but then also training our workforce, finding someone to mentor, and really keep the community growing together. So.
Thanks. And I'm also interested in your input here, Gabe, as far as all this data coming in, particularly from open source, potentially even unknown sources. What do we need to worry about as far as the data, managing the data, and so forth?
Yeah, so to echo statements that both Kevin and Ann made about the fusion of the data, there is a lot that needs to be done to integrate and, again, provide value via AI. So if you think about the AI ladder, there's collection, there's organization, there's analysis, and then actually infusion of that information. So the infusion piece is important to get your models correct, have your data science developers work purely in an environment that actually brings that to them, rather than spending all of their time doing the cleansing, doing the access, doing all of the ETL kinds of things that are time consuming. And so we want to make sure that we have something that takes advantage of both hybrid cloud as well as cognitive capabilities that are inherent in the sort of AI and modeling process.
So it sounds like we have varied use cases potentially too. There are things that an individual would have the capability of doing, and then there are things that an individual wouldn't be able to approach. This would require sophisticated cloud computing architectures and so forth. So I'm curious just to take another sampling across the panel here. Does anybody have a favorite use case in your domain, whether it's with GNSS or just acquisition, survey, map making, or data, and so forth?
Well, I'll jump out here, and within the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, we have a capability called the UCOP, Use Case Common Operating Picture, and it's been around a long time, but always looking to industry partners and others to help us to improve it. Much of the data is internal, but we're working, especially over the last year and a half with COVID, helping to make sure that there's links to make it publicly available. And then, within the Army, both again at Fort Leonard Wood, a proponent office there, and then with the Army Geospatial Center out at Fort Belvoir, are key nodes where we're always looking to innovate and again partner with others to figure out what do we have now, what do we need for the future. But that UCOP is helping our organizations to really understand where we're at and where we're going as an organization. So,
nice, thank you. And do you have anything to offer?
So I have a favorite one, but it's not one we're working on hard right now, but it's still SSA side. So instead of looking down, looking up, I mean, if we have all these satellites and we have civilians flying from one side of the globe to the other, and how do we deconflict all that? And there's a lot of SSA missions that are out there. The futuristic part of those launching in the 2022, 2023, 2024 timeframe that really looks at objects, right? Objects in space. Do we have debris issues? Are people safe when we've got people flying in space? And then there's the whole meteor side of it. So I think, I know from my standpoint is how do we mature that analysis, and then how it integrates all the way from space to ground. How do we work with air traffic controllers all the way to all these space operators? And if we have, I haven't heard the flying cars much lately, but we have also all those types of things too. So again, how do we work in those dynamic environments? So I think kind of the SSA mission is kind of my favorite right now.
Nice. Thanks. And I have another one here too. Because Earth imaging is increasingly requiring more data fusion, and it's coming from satellite, also manned and even unmanned platforms, I want to tap you, Kevin, real quick and just see, can you walk us through some of the things that the Army Corps of Engineers is doing to address that?
Well, I want to first highlight, we have 45 districts across the nation and overseas, and each of them have their organic capability. Here in St. Louis, we do have a technical center of expertise, and we work with 8 major contractors on a 5-year contract to really cover any customer across the nation and around the world. So federal customers, even down to the state and local level. So a key capability to manage those contracts and have the technical expertise that know how to really answer the mail and make sure that the customer and the product is what they need for the future. So, and then down in Galveston district, again, other partners that are helping really with the processing and the GIS capabilities and really pushing the envelope. And so, again, I just wanted to highlight a couple of key nodes of where we're doing the work and some of our experts.
Okay, thanks. And I know that some of the federal mapping projects, such as the 3D elevation program, they're taking in some of the unmanned platforms as well. Is that something that you're also dealing with?
Yes, again, there's a couple key districts here in St. Louis, Portland District, again, that have UAV platforms that are really, whether it be for disaster response or monitoring of levees and system before and after flooding is the key capability we're trying to provide in-house, and then contract work that we rely upon, similar contract capability up and down the Mississippi River and other inland waterways. So yes, again, in-house and leveraging contract capabilities is a key part of the Corps of Engineers mission.
Nice, thank you. And so I'm going to move into beyond a little bit here too, and I want to ask you, Gabe, a data fabric may be employed to effectively connect space to mud and beyond. And current capabilities or the concept of data fabrics are generally vague. So I'm going to ask you to clarify a little bit more about data fabric and also discuss what pipelines and how those fold into it, the data pipelines with that fabric. So what is important to know about an enterprise data fabric, especially in the context of technology and solutions?
Yeah, so going back to the management and security and governance of everything, the management of a data fabric includes, not just data at rest, but also data in motion, the integration of that data, and also the virtualization piece. So people tend to think of virtualization as the part of the pipeline that is important, but you can always over-provision a logical architecture to a set of nodes that is just too much. And so you have to take into account a number of factors that include things like governance and, importantly, the quality, the stewardship of that data, have a master data management type of strategy that's included. And then on the security side, both outward threats as well as insider threats. And so being able to enforce those policies across multiple clouds is very important.
Okay. And something that comes to mind for me as well is that with all this real data coming in, is there still a need for synthetic data?
So from the synthetic data standpoint, we've been dabbling in that from the machine learning standpoint. There is a lot of problem sets where we have fleeting targets. There's sparse data. Maybe in the DoD or in the intelligence community as new capabilities are being developed. In different countries, we don't see stuff very often. May not see a capability, we may not see a platform, we may not see a launch or a test. And so when you don't have those opportunities, somehow you have to create that synthetic data so that you can start training the machine learning algorithms. And as we get data, we can replace that data with the existing commercial data sets. But if we want to automate those processes and we want to do automated detection, that synthetic data generation is very helpful, as well as even for training purposes. There's a lot of things we can't simulate for the military in a field, what they're going to look at. So that synthetic data also helps those environments.
Okay, thanks. Also, would we give our synthetic data to our adversaries instead of our real data? It's a bad joke, I'm sorry. But anyway, it looks like we're about 10 minutes past the hour, so I will open up to audience questions. And as those come forward, we'll go ahead and put a couple others in there. So Joe, I'm curious, synthetic aperture radar sensors are capable of many things. So the imaging is something that's more common, but I've also recently learned RF sensing is something. Is that something you can elaborate on?
Yeah, so I think SAR data is an interesting phenomenology. There's some other interesting stuff coming out, hyperspectral data, constellations going up. I love it because it's not super easy to interpret at first, but then once you start to understand it, you can unlock a lot of value from it. And there's information contained in SAR that's not contained in passive sensors, so phase history, things like that. And it's actually one area where I think in general you hear a narrative that in technology, the private sector has a lead on the government. The most innovative work happening in AI is happening at Google or Apple or But actually with synthetic aperture radar, I think a lot of the most innovative work that's ever happened has happened at the US government, and it's actually industry that's lagging the government in this case. But yeah, there's some unique characteristics to it. It's probably most known for being able to see at night because it's producing its own photons. Those are returning to the sensor. It can see through most weather, see through clouds, see through smoke, which makes it really useful for monitoring disasters as they unfold or monitoring in general. But I think the use cases that I'm most excited about are not really what we've been talking about on this panel, big data problems. The US government has a purview of the entire world. You want to know what's happening everywhere all the time. There are sort of infinite additional sites that you'd like to monitor. But from a commercial perspective, somebody cares about their backyard. It's not a big data problem. It's actually like just their thing. And so what I like about SAR is that because of the physics of it, you can produce really, really high resolution data on a fairly frequent basis with very small satellites that don't cost as much as the large lenses required in optical. And you can start to answer some of those tiny questions. And so that's where I think the opportunity is commercially. We talk about it as a long tail, which is kind of just a fancy way of saying there's billions of people in the world. They have billions of lives that they're living, and there's relevant information to just a few small pockets of them that is hidden in this data that we're collecting already. And if we can just unlock the value of giving them access to that data to answer these very specific small questions that are very valuable to them, but maybe not processing terabytes or petabytes of data, that's actually where a lot of the opportunity is that lies ahead. So yeah, SAR is a pretty exciting opportunity, especially because people care about change, they care about monitoring. That's difficult to do with optical data where weather gets in the way 2/3 to 3/4 of the time. And like I said, these satellites with the type of resolution people are expecting commercially, because they've looked at Google Maps and they're expecting aerial imagery, to get down below 30 centimeters takes a really big lens, and that's a really expensive proposition. So it's not very accessible commercially today. Whereas with SAR, you can get those sub 50 centimeter, sub 30 centimeter resolutions out of a product that only weighs less than me. So it's much cheaper to build and launch. So yeah, I think there's going to be a lot of opportunity unlocked by that. But people are going to have to get over how weird it is to look at initially. It's not as easy to interpret as optical imagery for sure.
True. I know we all, everyday lay people, educated ourselves quite fast with Google Maps and mobile maps and things like that. So I'm just trying to envision what sort of cultural shift we might encounter if sub-meter, even sub-centimeter imagery from satellites using SAR and other technologies was in our everyday lives. That's something that I welcome the audience to investigate as well.
I'll jump in on that because I think that's the challenge today. We have so many young folks and many of us that when at home in a big city, we have the incredible capabilities at our fingertips. But as you deploy it into a disaster area or overseas, and you don't have that. And so having to build up and then grow that understanding of the environment is a challenge, and that we need to be speaking with our senior executives and senior leaders, but that is definitely a challenge. I wanted to highlight the SAR and hyperspectral capabilities. Really a lot of potential there, and really trying to unlock the capabilities there. One last thing I didn't mention would be the hydro survey. Mud is dirt and water, and so for those that have capabilities with hydro survey, that's a key capability, whether it be coastal or inland waterway focus. Very important for us with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Kind of our three main areas would be for navigation. Keep our inland waterways open for navigation is key for our nation and economy. Flood risk management when we're maintaining and monitoring levees in time of floods. And then ecosystem restoration, and that's a huge, and we haven't really addressed that much today. Understanding our environment and really, the capabilities that we're talking about are going to help us to do that. So.
Nice. Yeah, I know I've used I just call them stacks, mega stacks. All the map layers that are available today. Some of them are more well known than others, but buying a house or deciding what to do with your property, all the same problems that are emulated. They're industry problems. They're also government problems, infrastructure problems. They're scaling down to the individual level. So we're now empowering ourselves as individuals to be able to make a map, even with a mobile device, to say, should I buy that house? Things like that.
Yeah, I think the cause and effect. I mean, being able to monitor what we do, whether it is building a building, changing a roadway, doing temporary changes to a roadway with some of the environmental massive storms we've had. It's looking at the cause and effect of what we're doing and being able to monitor that in many different sensing domains that we've never had that opportunity in the past. So I think that we have that more at our fingertips, and hopefully we can stop larger disasters from happening by monitoring these different events.
Okay.
I can give you a weird example of that from my job. So part of my job, I get to, every time there's a commercial inquiry that comes to my team and we talk to that person. Commercial for us is not just businesses, it's also researchers, things like that. And one of the people that came to us recently was monitoring Pacific walrus populations in rural Alaska. So it turns out that walruses, they have basically parties a couple times a year where like tens of thousands of them get together on a beach and kind of hang out. And you can count them, but if you fly a plane too close to them, it causes them to stampede. If you get a boat too close to them, it causes them to stampede. So it's really difficult to know where they are, when they're there, how many of them there are. And so this person was excited because he's spent his entire life trying to track these Pacific walrus populations as they migrate back and forth between Russia and Alaska, pretty difficult places to survey on a regular basis. And the ice is melting where they typically eat. And so what they're curious about is now they have to swim miles out into the Bering Strait to go eat and then swim back. And these are not very graceful animals. So they're worried that they're basically exhausting themselves trying to go eat, but they don't know. They don't know if the population is growing or dwindling. So that's a use case where, and to your point, monitoring, that would be like, you can't task the national assets to look at the Pacific walrus population, but you can task a commercial satellite to do that, and there isn't a good alternative. So there's a million use cases like that, and we learn about a new one every single day. So unlocking that, I think, is where there's a ton of potential, at least for satellite imagery.
Mm-hmm. And that ties into a question that the audience has asked too, that I think is an exciting question. Which use cases don't you have but wish you did? That's a tough one to answer.
That is. I'll jump in and just say I think we have something to build upon with the walruses. It's great to see people in person and enjoy the reception tonight and other events this week. I think these panels and sessions are important, but it'll be the one-on-one interaction and finding out those use cases and finding out something that someone else is doing, talking to someone that's not in the geospatial community and finding out what their needs are. I think that's a key, important for all of us to continue that every day.
Thanks. Anybody else?
Yeah, taking advantage of the technology solutions that we have today is quite a remarkable leap from what we used to have, let's say, 20 years ago when we hosted NGA Earth back in the Hurricane Katrina timeframe. There were a lot of legacy systems. There were Hadoop clusters and things that we had to sort of lift and shift. There's actually a lot of money to be had by migrating that to a data fabric type of architecture. So not just the architecture, but the set of services, the containerized environments that you actually deal with in a multi-cloud sort of way is something that a lot of our agencies are looking to do, and we want to try to help enable that.
I think another one is just critical components in the architectures that we have in modeling if they didn't exist. I mean, we talk about redundancy or not redundancy and where we take risks, but I don't think we really model those. So if satellites disappeared or we had some type of catastrophic failure of GPS, I know we talk about it. We talk about some of the redundancy out there. How do we work in those environments? So I think there's not a lot of use cases on that standpoint that at least we're working in these environments. They're more of a positive problem set, recommender engines, whatever. We're not thinking about the faults of the system.
One other area I'll add is the integration of building information management, or BIM, with larger GIS capabilities. I think there's movement in that direction, and that's important. Again, different communities that are coming closer and closer together, so I think that's an important use case and area to keep some focus on.
Nice, thank you, everybody. And that also feeds into another audience question. What can industry do to help integrate and innovate commercial imagery and other technologies into the GEOINT community, or for the GEOINT community? Because I guess we're acknowledging we have some barriers and some obstacles. So there, for a given use case, your pathway for acquiring data and getting a decision would be drastically different depending on what your use case is. And so I think that's where the question is going with that, is how do we take some of those open things into the GEOINT community?
I think we need more of a open source approach to things, and I think we need more data that's available. Maybe the government needs to invest in the data instead of us individually having to buy the data, or the community of developers having to purchase data. I think the data specifically for Earth observation needs to be available and free. I think that would spur on innovation. And I think it's cost prohibitive in a lot of cases for these technologies to be developed if it's not available. And if you don't, a lot of these things are collected for a purpose. I mean, NGA has data, it's collecting for an operational purpose. USGS has data for a specific purpose. So R&D is a completely different purpose when you're trying to do development. So I think we just need to avail that data more so that we can spur on that innovation.
Okay, thanks.
I'll just share that prior to 9/11, 5 years in the Army, and the training environment was so important. Our training centers and home station training for the active National Guard and Reserve units is so important. And then for the last 20 years, we've seen incredible support and improvements in the capability to the operations. And so as we do, we have operations going on around the world, but I think we need to adjust and focus and leverage industry and academic partners for our training events as much as possible. And really kind of try to test and prove those capabilities before you're in harm's way or before the next storm. We do some of that, and that ounce of investment goes a long way in downrange. So,
and I think one thing that you mentioned earlier was having maybe classified systems that couldn't be brought to bear on a disaster as it was unfolding because of logistical issues. The same problem happens commercially. It's a little wonky, but the way you license your data as a satellite imagery provider, the government doesn't break the license. They don't just ignore it. So if you just sort of absent-mindedly put a proprietary license on data that you then share under a disaster scenario, thinking, of course they'll use it because they're going on our good faith. No, they're going to review that license and say, we can't distribute this internally. And so there's great work that's happening. I know the NRO has been working on standard licensing terms that I think are really exciting, just not having to worry about it, seeing the brand name at the top and knowing you can use it. But I think there's a lot of work on the commercial side in terms of meeting the government where they are and licensing data such that it can be actually used across the government in a collaborative way, and not the same restrictive ways we might do in a commercial setting where it's more common to try to protect that data. So yeah, that's a big opportunity, licensing, as wonky as that sounds.
Okay, and that also feeds pretty nicely into data security. So we have these huge volumes that we need to manage, and then we also have potential zero trust architectures that we need to integrate with our data fabric. So I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on that, Gabe, because you have a background with quantum computing as well. Is that taking us to these solutions any more than we might know?
Yeah, that's a great question. The promise of quantum computing is manyfold, and one of the things that we're investigating with NIST and some of the others is around post-quantum cryptography. There are a number of roadmaps that have occurred. In fact, DHS, I believe, announced one yesterday regarding how to get your particular agency a little bit more resistant to certain algorithms and hacking capabilities. To add on to what you mentioned before in a joke, I think, Brad, about the data that might have good fidelity or not so good fidelity. I mean, that's critical to having your AI transparent enough to provide that value. And so there's a whole concept around explainable AI so that you know that the results that you're getting are indeed based on real data. And so with respect to security, it's a big part of what we're trying to do in industry. And that's also where everyone else can help us too, with the algorithms, with the models, and in fact, helping with the entire sort of AI ecosystem.
Nice, thank you. And it also seems like we've have about 2 minutes left, so I'll put another question out there. And I like this one. I think it's a good topic. Is how can we utilize technology to address climate emergency? And I'll add to that for specificity. We now know with increasing amounts of data over the years that climate change is both natural but potentially influenced by our activities. How could we separate those two signals?
Yeah, I would just note, in terms of climate change, I think it's pretty well established now that an energy transition isn't sufficient to stave off 1.5 degrees Celsius warming. You need land use change in order to do that as well. And that's where I think remote sensing has particular use, is that you can monitor what's happening on the Earth, what's changing, what types of land cover there are, and not just synthetic aperture radar, electro-optical, or hyperspectral, but all of them together in one place. So I think one place where I would like to see more entrepreneurial activity and where I've seen a lot of investment from the big folks in tech is building foundational land use, land cover data sets, but not just stopping there, building tools for policymakers to make decisions around what their hurdle is to meet their commitments that they've made publicly. So I think it's two things. It's tools for decision making around climate, and the second is accountability. You can publicly state that you're going to meet some certain threshold for land use or carbon accounting, but who's holding you accountable? How do we know if what's happening on the land reflects that commitment? Remote sensing is a way to do that, to build trust, even globally across governments. So that's where I think there's a big opportunity in terms of climate.
You nailed it. And I agree with that wholeheartedly. And with that, we are out of time, and I wish we did have more time. If you see us around, please bring your questions to us. We'll be here all week. And thank you very much for allowing us to have this panel. It's been a privilege and a pleasure.